Hello. Well, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to, I'm impressed by all the people before me, but I'm going to disagree with them all. So let's get started. Well, part of the reason I'm going to disagree is because we're talking about the most important thing, which is AI ethics. Well, not the most important thing. We need AI to talk about AI ethics. But we're talking about how it affects our society and how we should deal with regulations. So how are we going to deal as programmers also with people regulating us? So what are the goals? But first, before I do that, the topic is how do we govern AI? But before we talk about that, we have to talk about a definition of AI. And I know you just heard one, but I completely disagree with it. In fact, I think it was a little dangerous. What is intelligence? This is something that science has established. This definition goes back to 1883, okay? It's the term that we use to describe an animal that can do the right thing at the right time. So in this, I'm agreeing with what the first panel said, that what matters is what you do, right? And what you just heard, the machine learning, is being used to discriminate when you might want to do that, right? So artificial intelligence is just intelligence that's been built by people, right? It's been built deliberately. And so the whole question then about artificial intelligence ethics is whether anything changes, right? So if you call your software system intelligent, do you have different responsibilities for it than if you don't call it intelligent? And my answer is no. Building an AI system is a deliberate act. And so the people who build it or the people that use it, one or the other, are responsible if anything goes wrong. All right? So I'm going to spend a little time going over that definition and going back to that conversation about the singularity in artificial general intelligence. All right? If you're basically transforming from perception into action, then what you're doing is computation. Computation is technically the transformation of information. All right? It's not math. Some people think that AI is like math, that you might create something that's omniscient, that can know everything all at once. No, math may be perfect. Math may be eternal. That's because math isn't real. It's an abstraction, right? Computation is a physical process. It takes time, it takes energy, and it takes space, right? That's why we have to go out and buy computers with more RAM. You don't just get something for nothing, right? So finding the right thing to do at the right time requires, among other things, search. And you think, oh, but I just heard we can use machine learning. I'll get to machine learning in 2 slides, but basically even machine learning is a search for the parameters that you need to make all that stuff work, right? So the cost of search, and this is a little tiny bit of math, is the number of options you have raised to the number of actions you get to do if you're doing them one at a time. And we'll get to concurrency in a minute. All right? So examples of this include if you had a robot that knew how to do 100 things, and it wanted to try to find a path, and if one of those 100 things is the thing that would achieve its goal, but it didn't know that, in the worst case, it would have to try all 100 things, right? But what if it got to try a 2-step plan? Then 100 things followed by 100 things is 10,000 possible plans, all right? You may not believe this, but go ahead and Google it. You can find it on the internet. With chess, if you limit yourself to thinking about 35-move games, and we all know chess is simpler than Go, right? There's not that many things you can do. You're already at the number of atoms of the universe. I think it was Claude Shannon, the guy who invented information theory, who sat down and worked that out. But anyway, it's easy to find online if you want to see the proof. All right, so how do we know anything? Well, one thing we have is concurrency, right? All the people in this room are thinking, we're trying to understand, and we can share our responses. Okay, concurrency is great. That's what the cloud is doing for you, right? The cloud is like a whole ton of computers. But that saves time by taking the same amount of energy, but doing it all at the same time. And you need twice as much space for 2 computers, right? Okay. Quantum, and I'm looking forward to the panel at 4. But so far as we can tell, quantum is supposed to save space. Sometimes it does save space in certain kinds of problems, and so it's also saving time. But as far as we can tell, it's not actually going to save energy. Now, some people are claiming it is, but there's been no examples of that. I'm not a quantum expert. This is my tame quantum physicist. All right, so out of all this, omniscience, artificial general intelligence, is not a real threat. No one algorithm, not even deep neural networks, is going to solve all the problems. In fact, Chris Bishop, who was one of the innovators who got us to where we are now by introducing the sort of Bayesian approaches into machine learning in the 1990s, he's written a book, or he is currently writing a book, his new book, which is online, so that's why you can already see parts of it, where he's making it very clear the job of machine learning researchers is not finding the one magic algorithm. It's the job of a machine learning researcher is to figure out which algorithm to use in which situation, right? What representation is best going to be able to learn. All right, so as I said, artificial general intelligence is a myth. And one of the things that it's built on is this idea that human intelligence is general. So if we just make something more and more intelligent, it's going to suddenly be like human intelligence, all right? And you know, psychologists thought this 100 years ago. We learned we were wrong, all right? We learned we were wrong by doing experiments. So here's a pigeon. Incidentally, why do you think if you keep making machines smarter and smarter, they're going to turn into a human magically instead of turning into a pigeon? I don't know. Anyway, but anyway, it's easier to use pigeons. So pigeons learn to peck for food, right? You can teach them that. And you can teach them to flap their wings to get away from shock. So yeah, sometimes we evil scientists run electric shocks there, but we give them a warning, and they learn to avoid it. You cannot teach a pigeon to peck to avoid shock. You know, how hard is that? Impossible, right? You can't teach them to flap their wings to get food, because in nature, that doesn't make sense. So nature has handled combinatorial, evolution has handled that combinatorial explosion problem by sticking our brains on certain problems. That's why we can't know or remember or be aware of everything, right? Anyway, this is how science works. We think of things, and then we find out we're wrong. So why are we so good? Why are we the only, all the other primates are getting wiped out? Why are we the ones that are exploding all over the planet? It's because we're the ones who are best at sharing information. That when we can take advantage of each other's search, right? And actually, all of biology does this, but it does it really slowly. That's the survival of the fittest stuff, right? But we're the ones who can really pass a lot of information between each other. So it's basically culture you can think of as mining other people's search, other people's computation. And with machine learning, we're very good at that, right? Machine learning is taking the stuff we've already figured out. That's why this label detector thing, right? It's taking what we've already figured out, the computation we've already done, and putting it into a computer, just like we teach it to our kids. Well, not the same way, but similarly, right? So that's why we're already, that's like the whole question about when are we going to get superhuman with AI. We're so superhuman, right? Google search knows more than we'll ever know. Most books know more than I know, right? But we've gone superhuman at speech transcription. We've gone superhuman at lip reading, right? And we can do things that humans can't do, like detecting whether you're telling the truth by how you're standing. At least we can't consciously do that. We might unconsciously notice that. We can forge videos in real time. It's going to come where we're going to have a big controversy because somebody's president was seen on television live by people who knew he was giving a speech, or she, and that person is seen to be saying something they hadn't actually seen. That will happen, right? And Google can already demonstrate this technology, and they do. To their credit, they show you that, look, this stuff is out there. All right, so we can do all that stuff. Why do we get it about to human level? And then it's because that was what we've already mined. Like I said, why does Boston Dynamics look like two guys in a suit, like two guys carrying something? They're mining biology. They used motion capture. That's not all they did. They're super great engineers. But part of the input was to use biology, right? So prior computation, all right? So the intelligence explosion, right? this is another theory. It's not artificial general intelligence. It's more towards that singularity idea again. The idea is that if you have a machine that can self-improve, if it can learn how to learn, you'll get exponential growth. And this has been an idea kicking around since the 60s, even older than the singularity idea. But Nick Bostrom refined it in the last decade, saying that one of the big issues is unintended consequences. So you built an AI system that you let loose on the world, and it had the goals that you told it to have, but it's also trying to learn for itself how to meet the goals. So it might act, you tell it to file a lot of paper, and it turns the whole world into paper clips, right? So superintelligence actually is not a myth. But my problem with Bostrom is that he projects this into the future. If you think about intelligence, as I said, if you accept that it can be decomposed into these different pieces, then every single machine we've ever bought is AI, built, right? Okay? Pulleys transfer our action into stronger action. It's a kind of computation. And certainly writing is off-board memory. Right? And let's have a look, so 12,000 years of AI. Let's have a look at what happened when we got writing 10,000 years ago, all right? Up until 10,000 years ago, there were more macaques than there were hominids, right? Hominids were doing okay. We were on most of the continents. But look at this. It's an exponential increase, right? And that's an exponential increase on an exponential scale, on a log scale, sorry. A log scale. So that's hyper-exponential. So there's your intelligence explosion. The mistake is to think that AI is some separate alien thing. It's part of our solution. It's part of what we are. However, there are unintended consequences. This is the XKCD version. So if you think of all the animals that are on land right now, the only ones that are wild are these green spots. And that was from over a decade ago. This data is very old, right? There's a lot fewer green spots now. This is the humans. This is our cows. This is our horses. We don't eat horses. Basically, we've turned the planet into stuff that either us or stuff we eat or stuff we play with, cats and dogs. All right? And we've been doing this since before, see? We've been doing this since before we had writing, but since we've had writing, it's really taken off. All right? So that's an unintended consequence. And this comes back to the title of my talk, sustainability. There's no timer. Where's the timer? Well, hopefully I'll figure out what's going on. All right. So how do we sustainably? Where's the timer? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so sustainably regulating AI. Let's think about the challenges of AI. One thing a lot of people worry about is the amount of investment going on in China and the USA, including China and the USA. They worry about each other, right? But I actually live in Europe, despite my accent, so we worry about both, all right? And I'm sure in South Asia you do too. Okay, another thing we worry about is the social disruption, right? So it's great in a way that we can just walk into a town and we can have our smartphone and we can not know the language and we'll immediately be in the best restaurant, right? It's great, right? But it's also scary when we think about what people are able to do as they move into towns. Some of them are very helpful, but some of them aren't. Rapid formation of new social identities. This is scary to politicians if suddenly you don't care about the town you grew up in, but rather you care about your religion or your identity as a employee of a company more than your national identity. People get worried, right? And then there's this other problem, which you notice I didn't just say AI here. A lot of this is about communication technology in general, right? When you have less distance, then you can communicate wealth and power across national borders, right? So there was a mention earlier about the Facebook and the elections, like the Brexit election and the American 2016 election. But actually, a lot of the world has had to deal with other countries messing with their democracies for a long time. And I realize that America is now the recipient, but before it used to be or probably still is, one of the aggressors. And there's another problem, which is that not because of being evil, but just because you got there first and you're the best, you don't even have to get there first. If you're the best, everybody comes to you, right? So that's leading to huge concentrations of wealth, and that increases inequality. And inequality matters. So inequality can be measured with something called the Gini coefficient. Now, I find the words a lot easier here. My husband says, why do you just put the equation, right? But basically, let's think about it as a graph. The idea of the graph here is that if everybody had the same amount of money, then when you looked at 100% of the population, there's a straight line, right? But if it's very, very unequal, if it's perfectly unequal, then only one person has all the money, right? So then you get like a right angle. And in between is this thing, it's called a curve, it's called the Gini coefficient, right? It's the measure of the distance between the straight line and that curve. All right, so empirically, I don't have theory for this is just a fact. Societies seem to be happiest when you have a Gini coefficient around 0.27. What that means is that you don't want perfect egalitarian, socialist, whatever. It seems that humans need to have a gradient to follow. We need to get rewarded. Or you can think of this also as being useful to give money, make sure that the innovators are able to get money to be able to realize their ideas, right? But once you get up to 0.3, 0.4, you start getting people being angry, vandalism, people thinking things are unfair. And when you get over 0.4, you actually have economies start to decline. Not enough people have enough money to spend money, right? And this is one of the things when you're really thinking about economy, what even is security, right? We've been here before. The high level of inequality we have right now and the high level of political polarization, and these co-vary, okay? This is polarization measured by whether or not politicians are willing to work together in America. These are American numbers. And this is the amount of the income the top 1% has. All right? And the last time the inequality and the polarization were this high led to World War I. We're just on the 100th anniversary of the armistice of World War I, right? So, yeah, these things have repeated. I need to make sure I come to time, so I'm going to skip over this. So distance-reducing technologies probably are the things that allow us to pile money up, and then there's huge disruptions, right? People talk about the great decoupling in 1978 here, when wages stopped tracking productivity. But when you look at this graph, you can see that there was actually a great coupling, and that was policy. People said the elite and the proletariat, they got together and said, we cannot handle world wars and financial crashes all the time. We don't want this much disruption. And so they started redistributing money better. All right, so governing AI isn't that different from just governing. Like I said, we're basically apes with tech in the first place, right? Regulating AI is very like regulating software in general, okay? So we can be transparent and accountable. People say, oh, if you try to regulate AI, you'll take away the magic juice, the deep learning. In the worst case, AI is as hard to understand as a human, right? We don't go and try to figure out people's synapses when we audit a bank. We look at the books, right? AI actually facilitates transparently honest accounting. We can see exactly why systems did why they did. That's why every time there's been a fatality with a driverless car, it's been front page news within 2 or 3 days, what the car saw, why it did what it did, why the developers had made it do that. Why? Because the automotive industry is really well regulated, and so all that stuff is kept in logs. Every industry could keep that in logs. I'm not telling you that every AI system is easy to understand. I'm telling you that if you're worried about liability, or if you should be worried about liability, then you'd better be keeping records of how you developed your systems, how you test your systems. You should be running tests continuously online. And so then when the regulators come to you, you can say, no, we know our system works correctly. That must have been the user, right? Or that was a freak event. We shouldn't be held liable for it. All right? So yeah, we can and should document the software engineering process, the data we used, how we trained a machine learned system, and log the system's performance. Okay. What ultimately matters is the human behind the system, and this is why I don't like talking about AGI, right? All of our law system doesn't, you hardly ever get back. If your partner is killed, nobody can ever give you that person back. But if their murderer goes to jail, you feel like you got something back, but you didn't really. The reason you feel that way, and the reason we don't want to go to jail, is because we're human. And we've co-evolved with our system of justice. We will not build AI that is going to feel the same way, at least not safe systems, right? So we're not going to have that kind of ability with AI. No penalty of law against an artifact, which includes a shell company, speaking of money laundering, can have efficacy. All right? So that's just a paper. So what about the jobs? I'm out of time. Should I stop or shall I give the job slide? I'll do it. Okay. So we have more AI than we've ever had, and we have more jobs than we've ever had. And this was actually pretty well handled by Talon and Schwartz. The fact that let's see, the ATM example. But let me tell you, there's a little bit extra about this. Because the reason that there's more human tellers now than there were before, there's actually fewer human tellers per branch, but that made the branches a lot cheaper, so there's more branches. Do you understand? Okay? The tellers are actually a little bit better paid because they have to do a slightly harder job, but there's no longer these branch managers who used to make a lot of money and be pillars of their communities. Okay? So actually, we're reducing some of the wage differentiation here. We're kind of using AI to push everybody down to the bottom. Same thing with those truck drivers, right? Yeah, there aren't enough truck drivers now. Why? Because they're making half as much as they did in the 1970s. And then before the 1970s, you had to be an enormous guy so you could steer the truck physically, right? Now we have something called power steering. And so the steering wheel is translated. You're not physically changing the wheel. You're just turning it, and then a machine turns it for you. So power steering is a kind of AI. And we have GPS. And we also have spreadsheets. So you don't need to be the kind of guy that's a huge guy and also, or a huge woman, anyway, somebody very strong, and also be able to be good at scheduling and good at navigating. So the wages have come down, and now nobody wants to do the job, all right? So in conclusion, should we regulate AI? Yes, we already do, right? All commerce is already regulated. But what we need to do is to do it a little better. We need to help other people understand how they can tell if we're doing a good job, right? So the people who are doing a good job get rewarded, and the people who are being sloppy and maybe moving fast and breaking things like democracies should be punished. Right? So we expect those who build and use AI to be accountable and to be able to prove due diligence, and we should work with and innovate governments to ensure adequate redistribution, because we need to do our businesses someplace that has enough infrastructure and that's stable enough that we can raise families as well as build businesses. All right, thanks to my collaborators, and thank you for your attention.